I would like to lead towards your experience with spirituality. But before that, just a technical questions. When did the... Yeah, it's better to have it close here. It picks up my voice.
Okay, good.
So, when did the Beatles go to India? When was that? Do you remember?
Oh, my goodness gracious. That was... we sort of all grew up with the Beatles. I mean, it started with this amazing, as they called it, the English invasion. They took all of our rock and roll, they took all of our blues. Led Zeppelin, for instance, the first 7 songs from their first 2 albums were all written by Willie Dixon, who's one of the greatest blues pens out of Chicago. They never paid him back. And there was a lawsuit that went on for 20 years. I think they found $20 million to the estate. I actually helped in the lawsuit, and Willie died the day after the suit was done. But we the Beatles. It was a phenomenon, and as I told you, I think the other day, they asked the PR agent for the Beatles, to you as a PR person, what was the Beatles? And he said it's the longest running story since World War. And it was, and part of this journey, we went from this transition and from them taking pop music and Americanizing it, starting with really early R&B songs, and then moving into their own amazing talent. And then suddenly the revolution starts, the peace and love, and they grow their hair out, and then they start taking drugs, and they trip to India, which probably millions and millions of people followed this trip because it made such an impression on them. They went to the Maharishi, and it was basically they went twice. The Beatle wives, the 4 boys and their wives went the first time. They met the Maharishi, who was, as you know, recently died, but was a fascinating guy and had this TM thing that he was doing, and attracted
transcendental meditation.
Yes, transcendental meditation, which is very controversial for those of us in the spiritual game. It's very dangerous. It's not for everybody. But they were highly affected. Everybody knows that George Harrison was... suddenly the sitar entered into the Beatle music and the spirituality. He really carried the spirituality of the group. John was the tough, street-talking guy, working class hero is something to be. I don't know if you know that song. And Paul was the pretty boy with the very great lyrical, lovely love songs and so forth. So it was, gosh, I really don't know what year it was, but it had to be late 60s. That they went there.
But they were there before you made a voyage to India.
Yes, long before, because my voyage to India didn't actually occur until 1974. That's when the first time I came to India.
What took you to India? Why? I mean, you have been all around, and you had some wild experiences in Jamaica before anyone went for the Rastafarians.
Well, I was well schooled on being fearless, I'll say that. Well, it was, I think that everybody who has this existence that we call life have to define different aspects of it at one time or another. And one of them is their moral being, and another is their spirituality. You have all these religions, which are really, organized political parties to a certain degree. And then you have spirituality. So you have to define, do you believe that there's a higher power? Do you believe, or you just swept along because of your parents and they put you into a situation? Is this what your community was doing? Was it part of your life? In my little town of Jackson, Tennessee, to this very date, and it's a little town between Nashville and Memphis, we hold the record for more churches per capita than any other town in America. So you've heard of the Bible Belt.
Do you have a figure?
You just every street corner. I mean, every single street corner. And you've heard of the Bible Belt. Well, I lived underneath the buckle of the Bible Belt, and you were in church 4 or 5 days a week. I happened to come from a long line of Scottish ministers who came over in the very early days of America, and my grandfather was a minister in Halls, Tennessee, and I was in church 4 or 5 days a week. I know that my mother was so excited because she actually kept it herself, and she was so proud. I had a 13-year attendance pen where I missed any 3 days a week at church, the weekend, the church camp, the church socials, the church everything. She forced me to go to all this. It was almost like, this is where you met your wife, this is where you met people you're going to do business with, because it was spread into 15 types of Baptist churches, 15 types of Methodist churches, 15 types of sort of right-wing offshoot churches. It's the blacks community as well, which is extremely spiritual, which, as you know, accepted Jesus Christ when they came to this country, had also a whole range of churches, the AME churches, the Calvary Baptist churches, and so forth and so on. So it was a major part of my upbringing, but it was more of a social event and a requirement than something that was pulling me spiritually. And I don't think anyone really, sometime in their life, and probably when you're starting to reach your mortality, you start thinking about, well, maybe I hope there's an afterlife or something else going on, but sometime you have to define it.
Now, India, how did it happen? What brought you to India?
Well, it's actually several different things. First of all, I had an experience where a brother of mine actually died in my arms when I was 13 years old. I went into sort of trauma shock for about a year. I became totally introverted. I couldn't sit in a room with more than 2 or 3 people. And things suddenly, not of my own making, started coming into my consciousness. And I thought that I was crazy. I was very frightened. It terrified me because it was something outside my own mental workings. And it would be, I'd see somebody and I'd say that person is sick, or I'd walk into a room and there would be a vibration that would be coming at me that was evil or restless or something else. And that's why, one of the reasons why I couldn't be around a lot of people. Now, my parents sent me to therapists and they said he's not psychotic, it must be a neurological problem of some sort. But it continued, and my father's dearest friend and our family friend, they went on the journeys of St. Paul together and spent a lot of time together, was a famous preacher, Norman Vincent Peale in New York, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, and actually had his guide magazine subscriptions were somewhere between Time and Newsweek for over 20 years, and he was a great soul and a great man. And I spent a summer up there with him and his wife in Peale, New York, and he sort of put me on the path, as you say. It wasn't the spiritual aspect of a God or a Jesus or Allah or this or that or a religious thing. It was this super awareness that was outside my consciousness. And he basically told me, he said, look, Tigrett, Isaac, you can call me, he said, this has happened to me many times, this is why I'm in this game. He said, but if this is going to continue happening to you, you're going to have to spend the rest of your life, or at least the time while this is occurring, defining your spiritual life, because you're in contact with other dimensions and other aspects which people normally are not. And he said, it's happened to me since, and this is why I got into this. He said, please don't tell anybody, and I'm surprised that I'm here telling you about it, because frankly, it's like a fairy tale. Unless you've had these experiences yourself, there's no way anyone can conceive that it's possible. So he gave me lots of books on metaphysics and some other spiritualists to read and so forth and so on. And that sort of started me on my journey to India as I...
It's a direct sort of stumbling block, a moment where you became convinced this is the trip I have to take now.
No doubt about it, because I was terrified before, and I thought there was something wrong with me. And then here was this great man that I admired myself, because he was a close friend of the family, who was giving me absolute direction and be frightened, and this is not unusual. This has happened throughout history and been written about and thought about, and and oddly enough, metaphysics, as they call it, which I think is an overuse and under maybe mysticism is better to say, but it's been the basis of practically every religion that's ever been on the planet. There was a mysticism in Christianity, which, of course, the Catholic Church grabbed and hid somewhere in the Vatican and it's been lost. But all of them. But India is the home of it all, to me, in my mind. And the Beatles represented that. As I told you, I went through a series of wonderful events that gave me the possibility of opening something, the Hard Rock Cafe, when I was 22 years old. And this is the first time I could actually be with a large group of people and feel comfortable, because suddenly I was the man they were coming to, all these kids, wonderful kids who were working for me. And suddenly these broadcasts, if we put them that way, came to me whenever I came up against a problem, because I was untrained, uneducated. I had a 10th grade education, barely.
And in excess of alcohol, excess of drugs.
Yes, absolutely.
Sleepless nights.
Absolutely.
Totally reckless behavior with your life.
Yes, and I'm glad that you remember that from our talks of the last day or two. And, I had a very troubled life with lots of parental problems and deaths in the family and destruction and violence and insanity and so forth, just like many, many other people. It's part of what many people grow up with. But it had affected me in a way in which I joined the revolution, and I became a revolutionary, and the drugs and the alcohol and everything else was part of it. It was also dulling some of the pain that I had. And then on the other side, there was this other me, this other super consciousness, if you will, or some other consciousness, or something else calling me that wasn't really part of my physical being, and didn't seem to be part of my mental being, which was broadcasting. And it kept, when I'd run up against a problem, an answer would come, and it was very simplistic. I didn't realize what they were until I got to India and did more studies of the Vedas and the Upanishads. But basically, it was these what they call the 5 human values, which are peace, love, dharma, righteousness, truth, satya, and ahimsa, nonviolence. So as I'm running the Hard Rock Cafe and I come up against a problem and I had no idea how to deal with it, suddenly it would come, is this a peaceful situation? Are you creating a place that is, people want to come to work and it's wonderful and joyous and there's mutual respect, or are they just coming here to get a check? And all of a sudden there'd be an opportunity to go off into a negative direction, and it could be very valuable monetarily, it could be very valuable personally for some reason or another. And then this word dharma, or righteousness, is this the correct way? Is this the correct path? And it would be so overpowering that I was sort of frightened not to follow it. And then when I did follow it, everything turned out great. And it's like I was on autopilot, and all of the weaknesses I had, but when it came to my destiny and the movement through time, these things guided me. And of course, immediately, as Dr. Peale told me, I had to find out, where is this coming from? Where could this possibly be? Why am I having this? Why is something paying so much attention to me? And what part it is me and me? And so oddly enough, I picked up Newsweek magazine, and I always read the book sections ferociously, as I do lots of periodicals. And I think this was, 1970, 71, and there was a book that Harper's and Row had come out with, and it was absolutely panned in Newsweek, saying this is a ridiculous book, it's absolutely absurd. And it was called The Secret Life of Plants by a guy named Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird. And it just said it was all about how they had discovered that plants could react to humans, and it had other phenomena, like the famous place at Findhorn, where through meditation they were growing these huge vegetables and all this paranormal sort of stuff. And on the edge of scientists, a guy actually from the CIA is the first one to put hook up a basic device that could monitor a plant, and he would yell at one plant and love the other one, and this one would disintegrate and the other one would bloom. And this I said, wow, this has something to do with what's happening to me. And the book was panned everywhere, New York Times, everything. I called up the authors who were in Virginia, and I talked to Mr. Bird. And he said, I said, Mr. Bird, my name is Isaac Tigrett. I'm a young man in London, and I want to buy the theatrical rights to your book because it has something to do with my life, and I don't know what it is, and it's just in my head. I have to buy these theatrical rights. And he said, have you read the reviews? He said, we tested this book, and HarperCollins printed 200,000 copies in hardcover, thinking that this would be because of plant lovers and everyone around the world probably believing more in their pets and their plants than other human beings. We thought it was going to be a bestseller, but it was panned and it's dead and it's over with, and we were about to commit suicide, me and Tompkins. And I said, well, it is my destiny. I must buy this book from you. And we did a deal and traded, in fact, telexes in those days, and even fax machines. And I bought the rights to that dead book for $10,000 over a period of 2 days. 6 weeks later, it hit the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed in the top 10 for 57 weeks. It became one of the biggest selling books of all times. And a guy named Wallen Green, who was a famous writer who had written The Wild Bunch and done a whole bunch of other things, had done a documentary that I had seen where it was a scientific documentary story, and I thought, well, this is the type of guy that should do this, where it's a feature-length film, not a documentary with actors playing scientists and discovering, and I forgot what the name of the picture was, and I'd seen it totally by accident, but now I'm sure it was faded. And I called him up, and he had a friend named Michael Braun, and they wanted to produce and write and do the whole thing. I said, I want to go around to these places and see these things myself, and actually got to go to some of these wonderful places. And of course, this just inspired more and more that there's other dynamics going on. There are things that are unseen in nature and in man and whatever. And this was a major turning point in my life. Again,
how does it lead to India?
Well, it leads. Well, this is okay. Well,
let's try to be a little bit more focused.
Well, it became. You got a short.
Let's turn it off because it's gonna.
Yeah.
I
lost the power.
Yeah, turn it off because it's gonna create this flicker. And we'll make...
Yeah, it's all off.
Yeah.
Oh, the what cycle?
I'll just unplug it.
Yeah.
I
lost power.
Sure.
We're in India.
Give me 1 second there.
Yes, and I will...
Just now.
Okay. Now, did this film project ever materialize?
I realized very quickly, first of all, I became the most popular man in Hollywood for about 2 weeks because I had the rights to this hot book. And I realized that I really wasn't qualified. This really wasn't my scene. And oddly enough, Stevie Wonder's brother called me, who was his manager, and said, we read the book to Stevie, and Stevie wants to do an album and do the film. And I thought, of course, Stevie was the best at that particular time, at the height of his career. So I actually sold the majority of the rights, I think I kept a couple of points, to Stevie Wonder. And he spent 5 years, believe it or not, doing an obscure Stevie Wonder album, which was the soundtrack to this. And it's like a symphonic, it's just unbelievable. It's so un-Stevie Wonder. I don't know if you can still get a copy of it, called The Secret Life of Plants. And he put up the money for the movie, or he had it arranged. The movie was made, and that was a long time ago.
Now, in practical terms, let's go into that was the setup. What brings you to India?
Well, when this, as Dr. Peale said, as long as this is happening to you, you're going to have to define your spirituality. You'll have no choice. And here I was, a young man growing up and drugs and this great popularity of the Hard Rock Cafe, and still this was continuously a theme that would interrupt my normal human self. Excuse me, and I had to find out where this was coming from. And I'd read many books, and I can't remember which book it was, but it talked about this type of relationship happening between masters and their students. And I read a lot about Zen masters, I read a lot about gurus, I read a lot about realized beings, I read a lot of books that I didn't particularly understand about metaphysics and the Theosophists, and the list goes on and on. And finally, it just became so overpowering, as if I was being called to find the answer. 2 years after I opened the Hard Rock Cafe, 3 years, 1971, June 14th, we opened it up. And finally, when it settled down and we'd gone through some financial problems and got everything and I could leave, I went on this quest, and I decided that this calling was coming from India. I came here 24 years old. I backpacked all over India, through the Himalayas, through Rajasthan, through the Punjab, then into southern India. Wherever I heard that there was a master, a yogi, a sadhu, an ashram, and I came very close several different times. There was actually someone in the south of India called the Shiva Bala yogi that he could talk to you through telepathy. You could approach him, and the vibration was so powerful that it was disturbing, actually. And he would speak with you and talk with you without opening his mouth or his eyes. He was in meditation. I came across one of the great masters of India who died in 1865, and of course, when these masters die, they believe that it's just the body that dies, and that the power, especially of a realized being or a being who has merged with his true personality, which is supposed to be divinity, we're all actually walking temples. And his name was Ramakrishna, who had written many books and died in 1865. And I had some very powerful experiences at his ashram, and experiences that overwhelmed me. But it just kept the fire burning. But this wasn't it either. I traveled and looked and was here and there and everywhere for about 8 months. And they kept calling me in London and said, "You've got to come back. We need you. We need your help. We're lost without you." And they were my family, and I had to choose whether to go back or stay, and I decided I would leave. And I had heard of one yogi down in a place called Aurangabad in India, and I went to Aurangabad to find this guy, and in fact I couldn't find him. And I had a flight that afternoon to Delhi to go back to London, and I was having breakfast, and one of the things that kept repeating for years was, it was just like a whisper, "I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you." That was one of the things that drove me to realize that whatever this broadcast was coming from, it was coming from a place, a person, an entity, a dimension, something, which I was on this search for. So I was having breakfast in this hotel, getting ready to go to the airport to get on the plane to go to Delhi, and all of a sudden this, in a very loud voice, says, "I'm waiting for you, I'm waiting for you." And it was startled me. I was having, in fact, bacon and eggs at the time. I'm not a very good vegetarian, although I try to be. And I looked up, and there was a picture of this 40-some-odd-year-old, strange-looking Indian man with an afro this big. And I just stared at the picture, and I could tell immediately that the picture was sending this message to me. So I immediately ran to the desk, the reception desk, and I said, "Who in the world is that?" And they said, "Well, this is a very obscure guru, unknown at the time in India. He's in Bangalore," which was a couple hours plane ride away. And the owner of this hotel, this is his guru, which is a very traditional thing in India for everyone to have a guru and so forth, which means preacher, really, in southern terms. And I said, "He's in Bangalore," and I changed my ticket, and I flew to Bangalore. I was in those days about 70 pounds ago, and I always wore black, and I had my hair down to here, and I wore all these religious symbols around my chest, and always in black clothes with my Ray-Bans on, aviators in those days. And I came here, and I said, "Where's this Sai Baba guy?" And a taxi cab driver said, I know where he is. And I got in the taxi, and I went out. It was a Sunday to where he just opened a university. It wasn't his ashram, but it was a university where he had residents. And this was a Sunday, which is a big day, apparently, to go see your guru. And I walked into this university, and there was a big open field sort of thing. And there was a tree in the middle, and there were about 200 people, men and women, Indians, all, women on one side of the tree and men on the other, and they're all standing there. I think I just had my second pipe of opium just on the way out in the car, as a matter of fact. And I didn't really go in and join the group. There was an entrance, I just leaned up against the entrance on the inside. And suddenly this creature came floating out of his residence down a little drive, and I was mesmerized simply because of his appearance. And there's as you even mentioned yesterday, there was this air of total serenity that was radiating from him, which was something new. And I'll be damned, he walked right past the group that had been waiting for hours to see him, and he came right over to me, and he said, "You've come at last. I've been waiting for you." And I just fell back, and he said, "We are not new friends. We are old, old friends." He said, "We have much work to do together. You wait here." And he moved his hand, and this powder came out of his fingers, which I had no idea what it was, and I just looked at it, and he said, "Eat it." And I ate it, and he walked away, went back to this group of 200, and they were singing songs, and there was so forth and so on, and there were some students there. And I thought, this is the one. This has to be the one. I mean, it wasn't even maybe or if or whatever. This was the source. And, of course, I had no understanding of any of this, but I'd been driven to India. I'd searched for this person. I'd been given this message, "I'm waiting for you," and here comes this master and says, "You've come at last. I've been waiting for you."
And his English not very good.
Not very good. Not very good. But he was. It blew my mind completely. I left. I left that day. I took a flight up from Bangalore back up to Delhi, and I got on a flight and went back to England. And again, these values, which were, peace and love and truth and so forth, in his ashram, there were all these signs about the 5 human values, but they were written in Sanskrit, and it was Satya, which is truth, and Dharma, which is righteousness, and so forth and so forth. And I had seen a little sign on a piece of wood that was just sticking on a wall in this funny place, and it said, "Love all, serve all."
And you stole it.
I stole it. It was everything that I believed in. It's what I believe, that we're born to be happy and to serve others. There is nothing else to do but that.
And on every single invoice of the Hard Rock Cafe,
yes,
it's written now.
Well, it became, in fact, I probably billions now people have seen this. It's in every Hard Rock Cafe in the world. There's now 148 of them in 68 countries, and casinos and hotels. And we actually bought the service mark, and we own it. We owned it, and I put it on everything. But it wasn't just a service mark. It wasn't just something clever. It wasn't just a philosophy. It's the way I started running my business. It's the way I'd already been running it, but now I had the absolute direction. Love all, serve all. And this is the way I ran my business, and I would get up and talk about divine beings, because at this point I realized that we were all divine beings. I believe this. and that we're all brothers and sisters, and we're all joined together, and there is an afterlife, and there are many lives, and all these definitions started to arrive into my life, and I had to get back there. And because you found him, and so the first chance I got, I flew back again, and this time he was
How much time later did you fly back?
It was probably about 5 or 6 months, and I could leave again. I only went for a week, and now he was at his ashram, which is in this very remote part of the poorest part of India, in a state called Andhra Pradesh, which is very arid and very, very poor, to say the least. And this is where he was born.
A few oases like this here.
Yes, well, this is new and wonderful, and that's why we're here. But it took in those days 7 hours to get here. The main north-south road. This is before India exploded over the last 10 or 15 years. This is back in 1974. And we washed out roads, and it was unbelievable.
Ox carts.
It was all ox carts, all
Hotels.
and anyway, I came and there was this big white temple, and there was a sand in front of it and a little wall around it, and there were about 100 rooms. And there was a little main street which had an accommodation office and a bookstore and a few little things, and there was really nothing here. And I sat there, and there were only like 150 men on the men's side and 150 men on the women's side, and he completely ignored me. After this pulling for years, and then designating, you are the one, we're old friends, we have much work to do, and he completely ignored me.
And you still stuck out as probably the only Westerner, or were there already
there were actually, this is when I think the real push came with all the hippies, and they were coming to Goa, and they were living on the beaches of Goa, and they were coming to India, all because of the Beatles, primarily, and this super consciousness or change of consciousness, which LSD, which was the dropout drug, and so forth. So everybody was coming over this way. So there were a lot of hippies here at the time. They were the only Westerners, and then a lot of Indians, and mostly the villagers that were around and surrounding villagers. And he gives us darshan, where he comes out twice a day, every day since he was 14. And he walks through the crowd, he talks to people, and he takes their letters and so forth. But when he got to me, he would make a wide turn, and I was shattered. And I left after a week, and that's all I could stay. And he didn't look at me or come near me. In fact, he avoided me like the plague. And then I came back again, and it happened again. And I came back again, and it happened again. And he was interviewing and talking to everyone else but me in the whole place. And I remember them saying, it's because that boy, he's a sinner, he sells meat, alcohol, all these different things. They had a reason why, but I knew he was the one. I knew that after my ego was finally shattered after 2 or 3 visits, I actually discovered that what he was doing was giving me a boon, which is a gift, and they talk about it in all the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita and all that. He was giving me a gift because he wanted me to travel on the inward journey and discover the formless rather than being distracted by the form. So when I realized he was never going to look at me and he wasn't going to talk to me, I came here whenever I could. I'd stay a week, I'd stay 2 weeks. One time in '76 I stayed for 3 or 4 months, and again, all I did was read the books, because I wanted to, he was directing me to not be distracted by him and the delusion of the possibility that this could be a realized being or something different than me, but to understand my own divinity. And these books that I read were everything that he had written and other masters, from Yogananda to Ramakrishna to the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana and all these other books. And for 15 years he never spoke to me. Never looked at me, never spoke to me, nothing. And they were the grandest years of my education, because he was not going to let everyone is practicing duality, which is how we fell from the garden when the mind-body experience became overstimulated. Suddenly we thought God's over there and I'm over here, and that's why we're in such a mess now. And but he wasn't going to let that happen to me. He wasn't going to let me be distracted. And so I learned from my studying and again this continuous reminding that there's something else going on, which was still being broadcast and happening to me, which forced me to continue to read and learn. I discovered the formless nature of the superconsciousness, as I call it.
So 15 years later, what happened?
Well, 15 years went by. During that time, there were things that occurred which, of course, as I tell these stories, people will say that is absolutely impossible, or I've never heard of such a thing, or it can't be true, or the guy must have been delusional. But I guess I needed it. The first instance happened in late 1974, and I was in Hollywood. I had a house in Malibu then. I was making a lot of money, so I had a home in the States, which was in the beach in Malibu, and one in England. And I was at a party, and I got drunk out of my mind. I was taking something called Quaaludes, and I borrowed my partner's car, which was a brand new Porsche Targa, black with beige seats, and I literally left the party because I saw that I was getting almost unconscious, and I drove up actually to the Sunset Strip, which was not far away, and I realized I couldn't drive, and I parked in the parking lot behind a club there. Yeah, I think it was a Roxy or Whiskey A Go-Go, I can't remember, and I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I felt pretty good, and I thought I could handle it, and so I go zooming down the Sunset Strip all the way to the beach, to Highway 1, and when you get towards the end of Sunset, there's canyons and so forth. And I, at 80 miles an hour in this Porsche Targa with no seatbelt on, in a reverse camber turn, which is a turn that's almost impossible to make because of the way that, I fell asleep. And the next thing I know, this car was crashing and tumbling, and I woke up, of course, immediately, and this car was just going end over end and side over side, and I felt a presence next to me, and I looked next to me, and there was this guru, Sai Baba, sitting next to me. And the car continued to go over. The wheels were all blown off. The windshield was blown off. The front, the back end, it went over 12 times. Even the roll bar, which is supposed to protect, was bent down below my shoulders, and it ended up upright. And I just got out of the car. There wasn't a scratch, a bruise, a trauma, anything. And I go, I must have been imagining this. How could this guru be here? How could this be? I've read about this stuff, and this can't be true. This is insane. But I had no choice. You have no choice. I had to dive back in. I got on a plane immediately, flew to India 2 days later, sat in the sand that I've been sitting in for, at that point, a year or so, and he ignored me. I stayed there for a month. He ignored me the entire time, never looked at me. Later, about a year later, I broke up with the love of my life, this beautiful young girl, and I went on a wild binge. I'm known as, and was known as, a pretty wild young man, and even at 61, I'm pretty good at it.
Binge means real.
I had it reckless, the love of my life. We had I won't go into the circumstances, but they were tragic, and it became a situation where I just had a little entourage, and I just started in London and went to New York, and just drugs and partying and everything from there. We went to Memphis. From Memphis, we went to St. Louis to Aspen, and I woke up. I've been taking these Quaaludes. It was the drug of choice at the time, and somebody gave me a big bag of about 500 of the damn things, and I was up to taking like 20 of these things a day. And they would make you drunk and, funny and bizarre and
so
out of your mind.
Close to a lethal dose.
No, actually, you can't really overdose on them, which I found out later through this experience.
With other drugs, were you close to a lethal dose, to overdose?
You might have been able to kill yourself, but you'd have to take an awful lot of these things. And I was taking 20 a day at this point.
Yeah, but I mean other drugs. Alcohol.
Drinking a little alcohol, but mainly taking these and alcohol. Those were, and marijuana, that was the drugs of choice at the time, and I was a professional. At any rate, I woke up one morning in Aspen, Colorado, on this now 3-week binge that had been traveling with this group of people, and this voice, the voice of Sai Baba, the one that I had only heard once when he said, "I've been waiting for you," he said, "You're going to die today." And it scared the daylights. I said, "It's those damn pills." And I took the methaqualone, I put them down the toilet. I immediately said, "I'm going to go back to Malibu," and I rushed out to the airport in Aspen. It was snowing. There were little planes that take you to Denver where you change planes, and I missed my connection. And I had to stay in a hotel near the airport, and I went and sat down. And what I didn't realize was that the thing that had been killing kids, because there had been lots of talk about methaqualone, which is the main drug in Quaaludes, is that when you have so much of it in your body, you have to slowly come off of it, or your body will contract and you will go into an epileptic seizure. And this is exactly what happened to me. I was sitting on the end of this bed and I turned on the TV, and suddenly my vision blurred and I lost my balance, and next thing I know I was in an epileptic seizure of some sort. I couldn't move my arms and legs. I fell on the floor. I swallowed my tongue, and last thing I remember was trying to make my hand reach to my mouth to pull out. It was a desperate move, because I said, all I have to do is just get my hand to my mouth and pull my tongue, because I was choking to death. And I couldn't do it. And on the floor of that hotel room in 74, 75, I choked to death and I died. And my spirit, as I read about in these books, came right out of the top of my top chakra that supposedly leaves your body, your spirit, out of the top of your head. And the next thing I know, I'm in some form of electricity. There's probably about 2 people in the whole world that have ever had this experience that will see this, but God bless us all for having this experience, because it changed everything. Because I was dead and I died, and I was on the ceiling and I was looking down at my corpse, and I went, "What is that? What is that? I thought I was that. I'm this. What's this? I thought I was that, but I'm this." And I was in what is called the light body. I was in the spirit body, and I had a consciousness of who I was, but there was no 5 senses. And without the 5 senses, it's almost like you're in a state of peace. It was bliss. It was blissful. There was nothing that was facilitating your consciousness, because when you lose your 5 senses and they're all gone, and all you have is this super consciousness, and I knew who I was, I actually started laughing, because the whole experience was hilarious, because I was going, "Damn, I thought I was that. I'm not that at all. I'm this. This is amazing." And it was total bliss. And I just sat there in happiness, watching this scene from above. And suddenly, this little guru, Sai Baba, appeared in the room, and I'm watching this from above. And he picks up my body, and he puts it on the bed, and he presses on my chest. I'm watching this from above. As he presses on my chest, my spirit comes off the ceiling, goes back into the top of my head, into my body, and the next thing I know, I'm looking up at Sai Baba, who's standing over me with a big grin. And he brought me back from the dead. And I could assure any of you who are frightened of death, don't waste your time. It's wonderful. It's nothing to fear at all. It's incredible. It's a relief. And in fact, he took me out of bliss to bring me back here so I could do this interview with you. But when this happens to you, it's beyond comprehension, it's beyond belief, it changes everything. And immediately I got on a plane again the next day, and I go to India, and I sit out in the sand for 2 or 3 months. He doesn't talk to me, he doesn't pay any attention to me. But this experience where literally I've been brought back from the other side, I realized that there were other dimensions, that there was an afterlife. There was no doubt in my mind. That there were other beings, that there was this thing of karma was actually possible, of living lifetime after lifetime. So all that started to fit together in a wondrous way, which, as Dr. Peale said, you're going to have to define your spirituality. And the definition began. And this was an extraordinary thing for a young man to begin his journey in this wondrous way of being exposed to things that I can't convince anybody of. But I have no trouble convincing myself because I had the experience. And it led me to a joyous new look on life, and it led me to a feeling of service, and that the laws of physics say the first law for every action, there's an equal reaction. Well, the laws of metaphysics are identical. For every action, there's an equal reaction. This is what they call karma. Whatever you put out, you're going to get back. So suddenly you become very cautious about everything you do. And because I'm a loving person and a giving person by nature, it was very easy for me to then also realize that I don't see people really. I see beyond. As I even look at you, I see God. And I realize there's just something in my being. It's not an intellectual decision. There's something in my being that I feel anyone that approaches me to this day, I feel honored. It's like God approaching. This great opportunity is approaching. And I feel it with every single person that I see and that I am blessed to commune with in any way. And this is something that is the greatest gift. This is the reason. This is the great discovery. This is the search. This is the end game. This somehow kept me, while part of my life was being rushed into materialism and all the senses being overstimulated and everything that you could ever dream of happening to you, and at the same time there was this other thing that was there that you may forget about it for a while, but it wouldn't leave you alone for very long. You would jump back and forth, and I still am. You and I had a conversation last night about a very important thing to me, and suddenly I couldn't sleep all night long. My mind immediately left me, and this other side came in. And even though I've had, and everyone has had a difficult life, and it's part of life, it's part of the experience. Our birthrights, as I told you, are pain, death, and bereavement. And it's so funny because 15 years later, when Sai Baba called me in for the first time, I thought he was talking to the guy behind me. And he called me in, and he said, "You have any questions?" I said, "Yes, sir, I do. I certainly do. Why was I born into a family where there was lovelessness, where there was death and violence and insanity and destruction and horror? Why was I born into a family like that?" And he smiled at me and he said, "Well, to soften your heart." And I realized, because when I walked in that room, I was carrying this bag of horror. I thought I was a cursed man for the life experiences that I'd had, which are very common to many people. I was convinced I was cursed. And when he said that, and there's something about these beings when they talk to you, and the dynamic truth is given, the word is given, and it goes far beyond your consciousness, I suddenly realized that I hadn't been cursed, I'd been blessed. Because it made me what I am today. It gave me this innate ability to adore and love everyone. It gave me this totally empathetic mind that is empathetic with everything that goes on and everybody's pain and pleasure. And it gave me also this innate knowledge that I had a duty, and that this duty involved lots of people and lots of interaction, whether it was going this direction or that direction, or maybe I would end up by myself in a cave in India one day. But whatever it was, it became clear that my journey was going to be filled with this joy and the odd attempt at the intellect to understand the amazing divine nature of everything and how we're all connected, and everything is connected, starting with the secret life of plants. I mean, being one with everything is really what the truth is in my mind.
But there were very quickly then practical consequences with Sai Baba. You started to work on projects.
Yes. When he had first met me, he said, "Wait here, we have much work to do. We're old friends, we're old friends, we're not new friends, etc., etc." Which perplexed me for 15 years, of course, because I didn't realize he was preparing me. And one of the things that I had done, being, I guess, part of this peace and love revolution, is when I started the Hard Rock Cafe, which was an act of love. It was an altar to the gods of our revolution, which were the musicians. They were the spokesmen. They were everything. As I told you, I don't trust anyone over 30 to this very day, probably including you, sir. And
which is fine. I can take it easily.
But the point being is that the next thing I know, I'm building Hard Rock Cafes all over the world, and I'm dealing with architects and builders, and this becomes a routine in my life, building all over the world, dealing with architects and plumbers and electricians and engineers and this and that. And when I had started the Hard Rock, I used to get up and tell my staff, I don't know anything that's going to come out. It was a little 100-seat place. But I've put half of my money into, or my shares of what I had, I was a 50% partner at that time, into a foundation, and that someday when this place, if anything ever comes of it, if we sell it, we're going to use that money to help others. And in fact, we had service programs that we developed. We got very much involved in doing all kinds of charitable events and so forth and so on. We started soup kitchens when we opened in New York, when we opened in Dallas. There was a big homeless problem in the States, and it was spectacular because the kids would volunteer to go down and help the homeless. And of course, if you know anything about the homeless, they don't need food. They need respect and love. That's the food they need. And it was, these kids would go out and volunteer to go out and spend a weekend, and they'd come back totally different beings. It was a wonderful thing, which I realized that through my own experiences, I could actually expand it into my business and into my family with the people that work there. So,
back to the projects.
Yes. When I sold the Hard Rock, we had gone public, and then it had been 20 years to the day that I signed the contract on the lease and formed the company name. And it would amaze me because when I look at the contract, I went, oh my God, it's been exactly 20 years to the day. I came to Sai Baba, and I approached him, and actually this is a very interesting thing for me personally to say. He seems to manipulate everybody that's here. He's it's like a medieval king in his court, and he manipulates you in other ways too, mentally and so forth.
But he seems to be not only the king, but also his own jester.
Yes. Oh, he is. There was a famous guy named Krishna who was the biggest troublemaker. He was a divine being, wrote the Bhagavad Gita, and told more fibs and stories, and joked and carried on, and stole all these people's wives. They had them as gopis, and they said, how could you steal somebody's wife? And you say, you leave anybody for God. So that's he should be a stand-up comedian. It's a very formal thing, this darshan, when he comes out, and it's extremely formal. It probably has been in India since the beginning of time. When you get in a room alone with him, he's hilarious. He's absolutely hilarious. So anyway, I wanted to give this money to build anything that he wanted, because I thought that he was the one that would guide me, because he was my master. And so I tried to leave my room, and something stopped me, and I couldn't leave my room. And I was going to go over to his place and go in and tell him and so forth, and I couldn't leave. Something physically seemed to stop me, and I was confused. I went back, and then the next day I tried to go, and as I did, a group of people came and corrupted the journey there, and it didn't happen. And then it happened a third time, and then it happened a fourth time, 4 days in a row. And I said, okay, what's going on? There's a lesson here. There's something wrong. I'm doing this all the wrong way. I'm a benevolent man. I'm giving something to give a service to help others. I'm taking a majority of my fortune, and I'm giving it to. My family was, disowned me, because they said you only give money away when you die. You don't give it away when you're alive. And I wanted to see it at work, and I'd made this promise to my beautiful young people that I've been with for 20 years, and. So I said, it's me. I'm doing something good. I'm doing that, and then it finally clicked. And when it did, the doors opened. I mean, someone came to my door and said, Sai Baba wants to see you now. And I walked into his room, and I said, Swami, I have this money that I want to give to you for whatever use you wish. And it's not from me. It's from all of us that would like to serve mankind, that don't have the money but would like to give it. It's from all of us. It's not from me.
Let me ask a prosaic question.
Please.
How much money?
Well, that's 5 minutes. That's interesting. It kept evolving. The wonderful thing about India is that people get paid about, especially construction workers, probably 50 cents a day. So you can build amazing things. Secondly, I got Hospital Corporation of America, who was actually this family, who were friends of the family from Nashville, who built thousands of hospitals, to give me a deal, and because we were going to build out. I also went to the World Health Organization in Geneva and got their backing, because they said no one's ever been able to pull this off. You're in the middle of the desert. And when I told them it was, Sai Baba said it was going to be for free, and it was going to be for the poor, and no one was ever going to, they said, you're out of your mind, you're crazy. And then Larsen Turbo, which is now the largest, one of the top 5 largest companies, building companies in India. They were just coming up, and they were going to be the builders. They were the chosen builders. Keith Critchlow, who headed up the Prince of Wales School of Architecture and also had a chair at the Royal College in London, and was Buckminster Fuller's right-hand man, had opened the key to sacred geometry, was chosen as the architect. So it's like everything just pulled together. And Sai Baba said, and by the way, we're going to open this in a year. And they had all told me it'll take 4 years of planning, it'll take 3 years of building, but he has somehow, when he ordains something, it happens. I sold my house as well in London, and I gave him money for that, but I built a 500-bed super specialty hospital that now does only high-end operations, from open heart surgery. But the money, which I've actually never said on camera before, and would only do it because you asked me, totaled about $16 million at the end of the day.
There's one thing which is unusual for building a hospital. How large is the hospital?
We'll go over the day. 500 beds, yeah. 4 wards.
But you have 1 year.
Yes.
You are told in a year, and why in a year?
Swami has ordained all these projects that he does. It's almost proof of his supernatural nature and his power in India and his power over his hundreds of millions of devotees who all pitch in and everybody helps. And it's bizarre. He announced he was going to bring water to 1 million people who had been out without water for thousands of years, and that he was going to 2,000 kilometers of pipe in and build all these massive reservoirs and all of these huge tanks and put a cistern in 1,000 villages or whatever the hell it was. And he said, we're going to do it in a year. And the government of India couldn't have done it with their entire army and a corps of engineers or anything else. And a year later, it was done. And in fact, the Prime Minister came down to turn the water on the first tap and so forth and so on. Are you rolling?
Wait 1 second. Something happened. You know, I'm rolling to something. The last part of the
water.
The water.
So,
the hospital in a year.
Yeah. So you have the task 1 year, and of course you have been building things like Hard Rock Face,
yes.
House of Blues, and you have experience. This is undoable. Particularly in India, where things are heavily bureaucratic,
the World Health
disorganized.
Yes.
So you are in a situation.
Not only that, but you do.
I'm sorry, I know what it is. The battery has gone down.
I'll go into this once more. Okay, 08 now. Now again, it looks like an impossible task. 1 year, and you have been into building yourself, and you know you are in a situation where there is more bureaucracy than in other countries. I mean, worse. English, some sort of heritage, disorganized labor force, whatever. So now you're confronted with a task.
Well, what's interesting is that I've become a pretty sophisticated guy at building, and I know that having worked for years now building, I was a pretty good candidate to choose to be. We'll just give you the money. He said, you're going to be in charge of the whole project. You'll be over the medical planning, you'll be over the construction, and you'll be over the architecture. You'll be the head guide over the whole thing. And
but a hospital is a special case, and India is a special case.
First of all, when I went to the World Health Organization in Geneva, and through some political friends, I met with the head of the World Health Organization and his whole board, and told them what I wanted to do, and they out huge picture after picture of all their failures, that this model will fail. I don't care, it'll be a cultural thing where they will be frightened to come because you're going out in the middle of a place that's living as it was 2,000 years ago. You'll run out of money. The mere fact of the cleanliness and so forth, you'll have a death rate that's unbelievable because of the dust and the dirt. And they said they just brought out, here was Guyana, here was the Congo, here was Venezuela, and there were pictures all around the whole place. And I mean, they're just telling me, you're crazy, don't do it, you're insane, it'll never happen, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever.
I've seen a similar thing and filmed it in Kenya, Flying Doctors of East Africa. They brought a mobile unit into the bush for Maasai tribesmen, and there was a X-ray station in it, all really sophisticated. And as it was in the bush, you had 5 fairly flat steps leading up into the interior of this container. And the Maasai, for reasons completely unknown, did not dare to step the steps.
Yes.
And they had to have training by local people to tell them, and they were stepping step for step as if they were treading on raw eggs. So, and it was a failure, and we do not know why. So
it was a cultural failure, and I saw all of them. These people in the state of Andhra Pradesh, there's one doctor for every 125,000 people, and they're in cities. And this is a country of 75% are small villages that are living in an ancient way. They have, I would call them witch doctors, but they have ancient, organic medicines that they've been using forever. You chew this leaf for that and this for that. And even the idea of a structure that was approachable was, they said that we built one hospital, and because of just the size of it, it scared them off so much that they wouldn't even come near it, because only temples were built like that. And the idea of what medicine was, and these machines and all this stuff. But there was one chair that was empty at the table of the 10 people who were on the committee, head committee of the World Health Organization. It was a Japanese gentleman who was the chairman. And he came late. And he had on, he was a Sikh, he had on his turban. And he sat down, and the guy said, what's going on? He said, well, this guy is crazy. He's trying to build this hospital out in Andhra Pradesh in the middle of the desert for the poorest of the poor and all this stuff. And he turned to me and he said, what organization are you trying to do this for? And I said, for Sri Sathya Sai Baba. And he said, if there's one person in the world that can pull it off, it's going to be him. And I left, and they are all still naysayers to the end. And he said, he encouraged me, I remember as I left the room, he said, go for it. He said, he can do it. Because he's the master, he's the national treasure, he's a guru of gurus, they're attracted to him. And the villagers, he's the king of the poor, he's the guru to the poor.
But you were already how many weeks into this year? This
was what was so awful. He sent me off, and he's so gracious and sweet. So all these very wealthy devotees from all over Malaysia and Indonesia and India and Chennai and Bangalore and this and that, and they were all coming, and they were bringing architects, and they had models. And I'd sit with him, and he'd sit there, and he would very graciously look at them. They'd take the tops off and show them how this, and show them the credentials. He said, oh, very good, very happy, very nice. And he was just sat there week after week. And I'm going, I said, Swami, you know, I've already met with Larson and Toubro. They said it's impossible. I met with the World Health Organization, which he sent me to. And I even went down to the Hospital Corporation of America that built 1,000 hospitals at that point all over the world. They said it'll take 3 years just to plan. He said the biggest problem is going to be the air conditioning, because if the dust and open heart surgeries and all this advanced surgery that you're planning, the mortality rate will be 25% because of infection. And they said that alone, and then it's going to take 3 years to build. And I'm going back there. I'm going, Swami, we don't even have an architect at this point. He hasn't chosen. He's letting all these people come, and it's the most beautiful play I'd ever seen in my life. And finally I said, Swami, we've only got 10 months left. He said, yes, you've wasted so much time. I said, yes, Swami, I've wasted so much time. He said, go to England, you will find the architect, bring him back. And I flew to England, where I was living at the time, and I went down to, flight arrives in the morning, and I love Guinness, and there's a little pub it used to be where the Grenadier Guards had their mess. It's called the Grenadier, and it's in a little mews off Belgravia, and I went down to get a Scotch egg and a pint of Guinness, because I just love the stuff, and it's my life, and I've lived in England 38 years, and I love the place so. And this friend of mine happens to come in. He said, I was at a lecture at the Royal College yesterday, and this Professor Keith Critchlow, the king of Saudi Arabia, is giving him this chair because just like the Tibetans have, if you see the tonkas and the paintings, they're all geometric. Everything is about geometrics. And the same thing with the Muslim race. They're almost vortexes into other dimensions, or it's all based on geometry. They say that God exists or in this dimension in 3 ways: sound, light, and geometry. So this immediately was fascinated, and found out that this guy was the king of sacred geometry. And so I went over to his office, and at the Royal College, and immediately after, I think, my 3rd pint of Guinness, and I met this man. He was beautiful, and I'm going to give you a tape of his. You won't believe how important this man discovers. Sai Baba actually said his 3rd eye was open, and he is the discoverer of the ancient geometry, and his lectures on Chartres Cathedral and all the others are unbelievable. You will be mystified by this wonderful, sweet, wonderful man. And I told him that I was doing this project and that Sai Baba had sent me. He said, Sai Baba? He said, oh, I know all about Sai Baba. He said, in fact, I just did Krishnamurti's ashram in India just recently. And I heard all about him. He said, well, he needs an architect. Will you come with me tomorrow to India and meet Sai Baba? He says, yes, of course. And we got on a plane. We came over here, and Baba immediately called us in and started giving him instructions. He didn't even say, you're the one. He just said, no, this is the way it's going to be, and you do this, and da-da-da. And I got the hospital corp. They have an English division. They were doing all the medical planning. Larsen & Toubro, we were the biggest builders now in Asia, and we're the biggest builders here at this time. We're just coming up. Do the building work. We had 2,000 men a shift. We did day and night shifts. And the plans were coming. This was it's called a design-build job. That meant that you designed it as you were building it. And we were 2 days away.
On the run.
On the run. I mean, we didn't know what we were going to build in 2 days because we didn't have any plans. Because the medical plans are so very, very complex and important. Then you've got this sacred geometrist that says, no, 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 it has to be like this and it has to be like that. And then you've got these builders and you're out in the middle of India and you've got 2,000 workers who are getting paid 50 cents a day and lights up at night that aren't quite wonderful. Why someone wasn't killed, I don't know. And we worked with 4,000 people day and night from that moment on. And literally someone would arrive from England with the medical planning and the architectural plans 2 days before we knew even what we were going to build next. So we just ordered all the wire and all the concrete and all of this and all that and all the medical equipment and everything, and just hopes that we would get ready because it was going to open in a year. And the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Rao, who is actually the one who changed the laws that opened India to investment of the world, was going to open the hospital, who was a devotee of Sai Baba, as many politicians and many prime ministers have been. And Mr. Ramakrishna, who was the vice chairman of Larsen & Toubro, the two of us were working like dogs, and we just looked at each other. From my experience and her experience, we were going, this is just not going to happen. We'll never get this open in a year. And Swami would say, yes, we're open. He would tell people, in 1 year we will open. The Prime Minister will be here. He will open the hospital, and blah, 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 blah. And Critchlow literally would say to the medical planners, I'm sorry, you can't put this equipment there, and you can't put this electricity wiring here, and you can't do this. You have to fit what I build into this space. And that is actually built on sacred geometry, which we can go into, and I'll let you, when you read about Mr. Critchlow and see this, you'll go, oh my God. Yeah, that's a 5-hour conversation. So Critchlow, I said, let's get the facade up first, because we know the Prime Minister coming. So we got the facade up, and the interior was at least another year away, and we were 6 weeks from when it was supposed to open. To get everything done, and all the wings, and all the operating rooms, and all the wiring, and all the air conditioning, and Swami also said, on the opening day, we will have not one, but 2 open heart surgeries on the first day that we open. So, of course, we were concentrating on getting 1 theater done, and we had the leading doctors in India that came from Delhi who were actually running the hospital. They'd run the biggest hospitals.
You had to find them as well.
Oh, they're devotees. The devotees, they just come. Sai Baba has hundreds of millions of devotees and Indians. He can call anybody, and they arrive the next day. It's just the way it goes around here. And India, he's the guru of gurus, and of course quite controversial in other parts of the world. But anyway, we just looked at each other and said, we've got to go tell him that it's not going to happen. We had barely the beginning of 1 wing finished. We had the shell, but it was just a mud floor, and there was the big hallway that connects everything was all mud, and we said, we've got to go over and tell him that we can't do it. And we look up, we've just been talking about it, and here he comes in his car, and he hops out, and big smile, and he said, the Prime Minister's coming in 6 weeks. Yes, Swami, we know. We said, we're opening the hospital. And said, we're going to do 2 operations. Yes, Swami, we know. He said, let me show you where the Prime Minister will walk. And he said first he will come into the big dome, and that's where all of the VIPs and the governors and the this and all and so forth, and the industrialists and all this VIP crowd will be. Then we will walk out this doorway into this hallway. We will then go into the big hall, which is all mud, and we will turn left, and we will go up these steps, and we will go into the first bay of the cardiac wing, which has the beds in it, which is, there were like bays like this. He said, we'll then take the Prime Minister into the operating theater. He will see the first operation begin. He will then come back exactly the same way, and we'll go out and get in his helicopter and leave. So he told us exactly what we had to finish by the time the Prime Minister came. So, I mean, we were that morning putting marble floors down in the big dome on top of mud, which had to go and take up later and put concrete down. We finished the little hallway, we finished the steps, we finished the operating theater, we put up big tarps around the other so you couldn't see that actually the hospital wasn't finished at all. And the Prime Minister came, and it was a big ceremony and a big greeting and so forth, and Sai Baba took him exactly on the route, and it looked as if it was absolutely functioning. There were people in the beds, they were waiting for the operations, the doctors were there, everything was done. And
there were 2 open heart surgeries that day.
Yes.
So it was functioning in a limited way.
It's from that day on, they continued the operations, and I'll be damned those 2 people are still alive, because there was more dust in that place than you could shake a stick at. And the mortality rate, I think you've read some of it's now 18 years later. Millions of people have been through this hospital, all poor primarily, but even the great devotees who have wealth, because of their belief in Sai Baba, have their operations here. The finest doctors in India are here. The finest doctors who are devotees from around the world come here and bring their whole operating teams, and we'll spend 6 months working here. There's a beautiful man from St. Louis, and there's another group out of England, and there's another group out of here and there. And it is absolutely free. The operations are all high-end operations. They would cost you somewhere around $250,000, $300,000 to have one of these operations in the United States: open heart surgery, bypass surgery, putting plinths in, doing all these different things, just in the heart division. And then they went on to open urology and a urology wing where they do all kinds of transplants and liver and gallbladder and all that sort of thing. And he did it in stages. He made sure that everything was running properly, and then he'd open the next department, and the next department, and the next. And it's a miracle, especially if I was sitting with the table of all the men at the World Health Organization. Here it is 18 years later. This town was always famous for being the home of Sai Baba. It's now just as famous for being the only operating high-end free hospital that exists in the world. There is no other free hospital of this caliber.
Everyone free, for free.
Not one penny changes hands for drugs, for aftercare, for the operation, for anything. Not one penny. And the majority of the people are the poorest, and because of Sai Baba, and Critchlow also building it, he was so clever, he built it as an Indian architectural piece so they'd feel familiar with it. He also created it where there's 25 light wells, and you look out windows and there's greenery and there's light everywhere. It doesn't feel like a hospital, it feels like a temple of healing or something. You will go by a day and you can give your impression. But it's been an amazing thing, and to me, I'm definitely getting a seat in heaven for this one.
But the daily operations also that are going on, electricity that has to be paid for, are there sponsors for it, or how does it?
Sai Baba is literally a national treasure. The last 7 or 8 prime ministers have all been devotees, governors of many of the states, chief ministers, politicians, the leading magnates of business. And not just in India, but in Malaysia and Indonesia and this eastern part of the world in particular. So he gets whatever they want. They built him an airport. It's the only private airport in the entire country. They built a train. The government built a train to come out into the middle of nowhere to bring people to come here. They brought in special electricity and built a whole electrical plant, which I think we saw when we came in, so that there'd be constant electricity and there would be no problems with running the hospital, and supplied the biggest generators in case lightning struck that. They built roads. They built. So the government. It's hard to understand. There is no separation between church and state in this country.
and very simple things like medication, pharmaceutical things, are they donations?
They're all free. Swami,
free for the patients, but the factory doesn't produce it for free.
Because of a lot of the products like General Electric, Siemens, which is a German company, who do CAT scan machines and MRIs and so forth and so forth. They have a benevolent side, and when they see that this is the only hospital for the poor in the world, they almost line up to give you a discount, to give you whatever you need. The same thing with pharmaceuticals, the same thing with... There are many great organizations around the world that are very benevolent to the third world horrors that people are having to deal with just in getting water and getting health and getting education and so forth. So, yes, it costs. They set up a huge corpus, they call it. They have something called the National Trust. I showed you the former head Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India is on that corpus, and several other most distinguished people in India. And people give donations anonymously, and they created a corpus to run the hospital. He built a second hospital that's even bigger, that's in Bangalore, that's also a totally free hospital, and it looks like another temple of healing, and there they specialize in neurology and other things that this hospital doesn't. They don't have an oncology wing and so forth. He has built, of course, a general hospital here, which is for the local district people, which has operating facilities and just everything a general hospital does. The projects just go on and on and on. His famous water project that brought water to 1 million people that hadn't had it for 1,000 years. Education, building universities, schools. He has a girls' school in Nantapur. He has a university here. He has one in Bangalore. And this organization, they go right down to the village level, and they go in and bring them textbooks, and a teacher will come, and they'll set up even the most elementary education. They have medical camps where they go out into all the villages, and this is all over India, all over Africa as well, where Sai devotees go out to the villages and give education on health care and give medicines and basic antibiotics and other things. And in fact, you were a little late, but I had it arranged for you to go to one of these medical camps where 18 doctors go out to a village of about 200 and spend an entire day. They keep records on everything. They return. They don't, it's just a visit, a nice visit. So Sai Baba is an enigma. First of all, if you were the greatest preacher in the world, he certainly got that down. And in a country that the majority of the people, we in the West, are born to seek fame, money, and power. And in India, it's such an amazing ancient culture. They're born to seek God, and they think about it continuously. It's a major part of their daily life. Many times a day, there are 2 or 3 festivals every month in which everything closes down and everyone goes, and you're about to see Onam, which is the one from Kerala State that was about to start. We just had Ganesha for a week. It's an amazing land, and it's a mysterious land, and it's the last holdout, I guess, of the tentacles of the Western society, although India is now, and China, of course, are both. this is their century. This is really happening in India and the big cities.
You mentioned that there was controversy.
Yes, there has been a tremendous amount of controversy. One, within India, not so much, because they're used to these masters and enlightened beings, and there's a history of the Buddha coming from here, and Yogananda, and Vivekananda, and it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So the idea of an enlightened being is someone who has merged with their true personality, which is divinity. That which has never been born never dies, and that's what you are. You can't be soiled, you can't be hurt, you can't be damaged. You go on. This is just part of life. Death is actually another door, walking through another doorway. There has been a great deal of controversy, and particularly in the West. The word guru, I think the Beatles were the first one to give it a bad name when they left the Maharishi, because he came on to one of the girls in their party on their second trip. And then you had someone like Rajneesh come along, which is like a heyday for anyone. Of course, no one outside of Asia even understands what this guru is. If you were to go to America and ask people what's a guru, they would say, oh, those are those crazy guys that get all these people to give them their money and do this and do that. And of course, Rajneesh, who had no Indian followers, who was actually a university professor and was enlightened to a point and had great writings, brilliant philosophical writings, started an ashram in the 60s at the time when all the hippies were coming in. He said the way to enlightenment is sex, free love, and drugs. Now, this is just a gold mine for a 19-year-old traveling, backpacking through India, and everybody followed Rajneesh, and they all had a little Rajneesh thing, and it was wild. It was incredible. But it's so foreign, and as you know, America is so isolated. It doesn't understand Europe, much less any part of the other world. But there was a film that was done by the BBC, and I explained to you that I built my business on PR, and we had a huge department because we built our business on PR, and we got billions of dollars worth of public relations, either on camera, on TV, and publications, etc. It became a major part of my existence because we had to control the pieces. And lo and behold, I get a call from one of the Sai Baba people. I've never been big in the organization. I don't go to meetings. I'm not a member of anything. I'm totally isolated from the organization. So I get a call. They say, oh, the BBC is here, and they're doing this wonderful documentary on all the good works and the water projects and saving Chennai when they were going to drought and building the hospitals and all that stuff. And I said, BBC, who from the BBC? Because immediately whenever we would get a request, which were 30 a week, we'd immediately find out who this guy was, the type of people. Was he an independent? Was he really a BBC producer? What type of stories does he do? Are they puff pieces, or is he out to get you, or is he in the middle of the road? How can we influence him for the piece? Because I built my business on public relations, so never advertised a day in my life. So I learned how to control every piece that was ever written about it. If I could get 90% going my way, then I had done my duty. And I said, my God, what have you done? Who is this guy? Who is this great BBC producer who is going to do this wonderful piece on the great works of Sai Baba? And they, unfortunately, the crew had been here for a month, and they'd opened all the doors, and everybody had spoken, and they were doing this whole number of all the great works and telling everybody it's a great, and showing them some of the shots and interviewing them on all the great things in the hospital and so forth. I said, give me the guy's name. I called up Matthew Freud. Matthew Freud is the leading PR agent in Europe, and he represents the government, Tony Blair, all the actors, all the major labels, all the companies. He's a genius, and he worked with me in the Hard Rock for many years as a young man. And I said, Matthew, talk to someone. I said, find out who this producer is. He says he's a BBC producer. I got a call back 30 minutes later, said, you're in for the biggest disaster you ever had. This guy is not a producer. He's an independent, and all he does is exposés to tear people down to shreds. And I said, oh my God, Jesus Christ. And I got furious at all the people here because I just didn't know any better, you know. And I said, you're being set up. I don't know what they're going to say about him. There's been attacks on his life. There's been murders here. There's been serious accusations about where does all this money come from and how's he built all these things. That he lives very simply and he has nothing. He doesn't ride around in a Rolls Royce or anything else, and never leaves this little village hardly at all. Everyone comes here. But I found out that this was the most ruthless guy, and I knew immediately that he was going to go after him for something. And after doing some research, I got inside news from people in England into his production group, and they said that they were going to accuse him of everything, but in particular pedophilia. And I said, oh my God, if there is a subject which is now with the Catholic Church now being just dioceses closing, and it's probably, you know, the warning thing that goes out. This is probably the greatest accusation to destroy someone that you could possibly have. And I had already defended Sai Baba on other situations, and because I'm a famous devotee, semi-famous, I guess, Western devotee, and I defended him and talked about him at the Observer newspaper in London and the New York Times and other places that people would call and ask me what my opinion was because they'd heard things about him over the years. And I knew they were going to call me, and they did call me. And they said, oh, we're doing this great piece on Sai Baba and all the good works in the hospital, and you're the most famous devotee, and you built the hospital, and we want to fly you to L.A., and can we use the Hard Rock Cafe as a backdrop? And I immediately knew they want to use the fame of all the things that are on the wall because they can enhance the piece by saying, that's Madonna's this, and this is Paul McCartney's that, and this. I knew the mentality so well. And I knew I had to say something. I knew I had to say my piece. And I knew it was going to be a disaster. They had one person, one American guy who was claiming that at the age of 16 or 17 that Sai Baba had fondled him or something. And they had the parents call me and say, you have to be on our side. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I have no knowledge of this. I've never heard of it before. He's surrounded by dozens and dozens of people 24 hours a day, and if there was anything of any nature of negativity going on, everybody in the whole world would know about it in the Sai world for sure, and nobody knows anything about this. And I waited for them to call because they said, we'll fly you out to L.A. Can we use the Hard Rock as a backdrop? You could take us on a tour and show us and tell us everything we want to know about the hospital and the whole thing. And I know journalists like the back of my hand. I mean, I've played the game so well for so long. I knew what it was all about, and this was going to be the prime piece. The famous guy, the American with all the money, the Hard Rock Cafe guy, the House of Blues guy, the guy who got into India, built the hospital, gave him this money, was a devotee of this horrible guru. And I kept delaying it because I found out through the underground when their due date was to give their piece over to the BBC. And so they kept calling me, and I kept saying, no, I'm not feeling well, no, I'm not, I've got an appointment. So I wanted to make sure that I was the last one to speak on their piece, because this is the only thing I could do. I planned it exactly the way I wanted to have it done. I arrived in L.A., I had been in isolation for 8 years at this point, and had gained a tremendous amount of weight, which I'll tell you about someday. And they called me, the producer called me, it's all peace and love and flowers and wonderful Sai Baba-ness, and said, oh, by the way, we have rented a Corniche convertible and we have 6 beautiful actresses, and we want to take a picture of you going down the Sunset Strip in this car full of all these girls. And of course, I knew immediately what that was for and how it was going to be part of the dynamics of the piece and the whole bullshit and the glamour of, especially Englishmen and the Sunset Strip and a Rolls Royce and beautiful actresses and the Hard Rock Cafe and all the famous memorabilia and everything. I knew exactly what they were going to do. So I said, yes, I'd be delighted to. And I called the next morning, and about an hour before I was supposed to be on this set or whatever, I said, I'm sorry, I've got a cold, I'm sick, I got a flu, I can't come. So they had to cancel it, and they had one more day, because they had to cut the piece, and I knew they had to have it in 2 days. So I go to the Hard Rock, and the first thing, will you take us and show us all the memorabilia? And they make a big deal about going to every piece, so they're bringing in these famous names. Paul McCartney, Madonna, blah, blah, blah. This, of course, enhances the legitimacy of this whole thing by bringing all the celebrity of LA and music and actors and everything. And they talk for 2 hours. I'm on camera, and I had the Hard Rock. I knew what was going to happen. I'm sitting there waiting, because they're just asking all these flowery questions and the good works and everything else. And they were very clever. They had an Indian girl doing all of the interviews, so that it was like, you know, this was a local that was doing this as an Indian. It was so clever, and so obvious. So I was waiting and waiting for the question to happen, and suddenly this girl from this flowery 2 hours on camera with 3 cameras shoot says to me, and what about these accusations of pedophilia? What do you think about this? And actually they had a thing on me, and I said, I really don't care. Oh, well, then you agree with pedophilia? I said, no, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. I have no knowledge of any of this stuff. It may be true. It really doesn't make any difference to me. Well, what do you mean it doesn't make any difference? It's like the biggest crime and da-da-da. And I said, look, if you discover your spirituality through whatever, going to a church or to a synagogue or to a priest, and then all of a sudden the rabbi or the priest or whatever goes out and kills somebody, does something awful, and they have brought you to your spiritual definition, what do? You give up your definition? Do you just forget about the whole thing and it all was a hoax? I said, that's not the way it works. And then they asked me a second time, you know, blah, 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 pedophilia thing, and I answered again. I said, look, I don't know if it's true or not. I don't care if it's true or not. It may be true, but I don't care. You got to, and then I tried to explain why I didn't care, why it didn't make any difference. And then they asked me a third time. And I again said, let me put it to you simply. If Sai Baba asked me to jump off the roof of this building, I'd jump off in a second. He is my master. He has given me the definition of my spirituality. I will be by his side at the moment he dies. And then they tried to ask him another question. I said, turn the camera off. I'm not asking him anymore. I got up, took the thing off, and left. The piece came out. It was absolutely as brilliantly done as you could possibly see. It just made him into another Rajneesh, into another Maharishi, and it was sex, and it was money. It was the whole thing. It was perfect. It was genius for a man who does this type of exposés and so forth. And then, of course, if you look up my name on the internet, and there are some 17,000 references because of the Hard Rock and other things, you'll find many references to this interview on the BBC. And I don't know if you want this on camera or off camera, but this is an anecdote which has fascinated me. Sai Baba gives a discourse at Christmas every year, and lots of Christians come here, and it's a big celebration. Lots of Westerners and Europeans and lots of Christians from around the world, Africa and everywhere, come here, and he gives a Christmas discourse, and it's always about Jesus and stuff. And when he talks about these different masters from 1,000 years ago, he talks as if he was there, and he knows them, and he knows what went on, and he'll explain what happened on this day and that day and this and that. And my daughter was here with me, and he said it was announced that he was giving his Christmas discourse on the 26th. And he came up to me, he said, Tigrett, I want you to go into town. I said, "But Swami, you're giving your discourse tomorrow. I'd love to hear it, especially being a Christian." And it was a very important thing to me. Will never forget going into his room one day, and of course I left my family because they were so right-wing, and I'll never forget being in church and the preacher saying, "Every Jew is going to go to hell and burn for eternity. Every Hindu is going to go to burn for eternity. Every Muslim is going to burn for eternity." And Jesus Christ said that. And that actually was the moment when I was about 12 years old. Something clicked in my head and said, "The Lamb said that? The Lamb wouldn't say that. You're going to burn in hell." I said, "It must have been some pope when business was bad and put that one out, you know." So I said, "Yes, Swami, okay." It was very important to be there because he always talks about Jesus and things that happened, very personal things. It's a wild thing. So he said, "You and your daughter, you go into town." My daughter was leaving in 3 days, so in town I went. And he got up and gave a discourse, and when I returned, suddenly all of these Christians and these people were coming up and touching my feet and hugging me and asking me for blessings and carrying on, and I'm going, what in the hell is going on? And they said, "Well, Sai Baba gave a discourse about the garden and all the disciples in the garden right before he was arrested, and he said your name 3 times, and he said that you were St. Peter, and that you had been brought back here to help him, as many saints and sages have been brought back. And that he said my name 3 times. He said, "You're St. Peter. Tigrett is St. Peter." And I'm freaked out, and I'm freaked out because as a Christian, St. Peter is worse than Judas. Because St. Peter, Jesus told him, and this is his first devotee, he said, "I will build my church on you." And then he told him in the garden, he said, "Before tomorrow morning and the cock crows, you will deny knowing me 3 times. So as a Christian, this was like being damned. I mean, it was like Peter, the one who denied his Lord 3 times. This is horrible. This is, everything. And of course, it's all over the ashram, and he knows it, and this one knows it. And it doesn't mean anything except to me. And it's not exactly a pleasant thing. It's like I'm the guy that denied his master, his first devotee, and
at the same time, the rock on
which I'm building church. I mean, it's like, this is like a nightmare of nightmares to me, and I don't know whether it's a game or a leela or a joke or whatever he's doing to me, and I'm very unhappy about it. And not shortly after that, the BBC documentary, it happened either before that or, it happened right before that. And then I got a call from a lady in South America. She said, "You don't know me." He said, "But I had Sai Baba came to me last night in a dream," in which he does, many people claim that he does. "And he told me to call you today and to tell you that the reason for the BBC documentary was to clear up the karma of being Peter when you denied him 3 times. Because 3 times on the BBC you said, 'I am with him. I don't care. I will be with him at his death. I will jump off this building for him.' He said, 'Sai Baba told me just to let you know the karma had been cleared.' 2007 years later." So, I hope that's true too. So, that is sort of part of the amazement of being here, and as you have experienced yourself, you've seen this amazing devotion, and you've seen this amazing serenity, and he's an enigma. He's said it over and over again, no one understands who I am. If you're a realized being, there's no way to understand this. And that has been, there's something very beautiful about blind devotion.
So he will eventually die.
Yes.
And you have a task beyond his physical death.
Yes, I do.
Can you describe it?
This is basically unknown to most people. There's only a handful of people, including yourself, that are aware of a couple of projects. First of all, Sai Baba is part of a triple incarnation. There was a great saint named Shirdi Baba who died in 1913. He lived a very secular life and was very few devotees, and mostly around Bombay. Shirdi is a town that they named after him that's 60 miles from Bombay. Shirdi Baba announced that before he died that he was part of a triple incarnation and that he would be born again in a village in Andhra Pradesh in the middle of nowhere, and that he would, at 14 or 15, announce that he was this reincarnation, and that this avatar or realized being and whatever would then die, and then a third would appear named Prima Sai. And so this is the lore. And at 14 years old, Sai Baba announced that he was Shirdi Baba reborn. And he started his first ashram at 14, and his first devotees, and it all began there. And he's been doing the same thing every day, which is his darshan, coming out twice a day and moving among his devotees, since that time, from this village, which is impossible to get to. And in those days, you couldn't even get here by bullock cart. Anyway, Shirdi Baba, it's very interesting because Shirdi Baba now has 100 million devotees as well. They have built temples to him all over India. They have built temples to him. It's almost like he's been brought up to this proof level of this strange, mystery. Temples are being built all over Indonesia. England has some. They're built in America. They're opening everywhere. And Sai Baba announced who he was. He rarely talks about Shirdi Baba. He has a picture of him in his temple, and he's referred to him a couple of times, especially personal things about his life and what he said or what he did. Nothing was ever written about him. No one ever met him. No one ever knew him. Very few people came in contact with him that could tell the story after 1913 when he died at an elderly age. Sai Baba's here. Sai Baba has announced that he will die at 96, which he did when he was in his 20s. He's also recently announced, I will go according to the plan. I can leave my body anytime I want. And then 2 years later, Prima Sai will be born. He has announced the area of India where he will be born, and it's part of this triple incarnation. It started with this saint that died in 1913. As far as the projects are concerned, I guess being Sai Baba's builder and his rock, his foundation man, his glue, in a way, he has asked me, he called me in and gave me explicit instructions to build a vault for ancient wisdom, that after his death, this is supposed to be the end of the third yuga or age, and this is the Kali Yuga. This is supposed to be the darkest time that man has ever been in. The mind-body experience is so overstimulated that the outward journey is the only journey, and we're looking for the transient things, the gold, the silver, the jewels, sensation, whatever out there, and as in practically the Tao and the Talmud, and you can go through every text, they all talk about this golden age will come, and when it does, suddenly the inward journey, and that there will be peace, and it will not be I and me as a consciousness, it will be we and us, and it'll be a collective, and this will be the golden age where we fell from the garden, will be brought back to the garden, and it's well documented.
Let me ask you specifically about yourself.
Yes.
When Sai Baba dies, not if he dies, but when he dies, would that mean a sudden void inside of you?
No, not at all. Hard to explain. I've been to Ramakrishna's ashram, who died in 1865, and I felt his presence there. I've been to Amarnath and Kadranath and the places where these great divine beings are supposed to be, and I felt their presence there. That which has never been born never dies. Ramakrishna, who died in 1865, had the unique ability to he had 12 disciples. He could give them enlightenment. He gave all 12 enlightenment. His most famous is Vivekananda, who did many writings and is very famous. But they never die, so these shrines remain, and they have devotees. There is a Ramakrishna temple in Bangalore that I go to on Bull Temple Road, which has about 500 people come every night for bhajans. He died in 1865. Mahana Maharshi, who lives in one of the most famous sacred spots in India, died in 1950. He has tens of millions of devotees that come to his ashram to just be near the vibration every day. People go to Jerusalem because they want to go to the sacred place where Jesus was supposedly born, and they go to Lourdes because this is where the Virgin Mary appeared, and it's a sacred place. They go to Mecca because this is the spot where Muhammad did such and so forth and so on. So it's a combination of folklore, spirituality, and super reality. So what will happen when he dies, because he is a great distraction, people come here, and about 7 or 8 million people a year come here now. And to me, he's a great distraction. That was what was the 15 years of not talking to me was all about, so that I would evolute. You're either here to evolute or devolute. And when this controversial character who says I'm a realized being goes, then the only thing that's left, as it was with Buddha, as it was with Muhammad, as it was with Moses, as it was with every religion, the only things left are the books. And the way people find their
Okay, so I'm wrong.
Okay, yeah. 09.
sound okay?
Yeah.
Me, yes. Okay, yeah. What remained unfinished?
It's actually about 10 minutes.
No, there was the last sentence.
Yes,
well,
what we're
what did
talking.
he say? He was talking.
Oh, about the ashram, what will happen after he goes.
Yeah, okay.
So the books are remaining, yes.
Yes, what happens again is in India they call it the Jyoti light is turned on. If you go back and look at all of these great masters, saints, holy men, whatever you want to call them, they never had devotees. Jesus Christ had 12. He said 4 of them didn't know who he was. The Buddha, who became enlightened after meditation under a tree for some years, had five guys. The first great avatar known in history through the Vedas was Lord Rama, who was supposed to be the first God-man on the planet, known God-man. And he had 12 rishis, or 12 great spiritual masters who knew who he was. And it goes on and on and on and on. They always just had a handful. Muhammad had a handful, and so forth and so on. So it's very unique that this guru in this modern time has all of these world devotees and world service organizations and all this going on. But it is, if you are not a spiritual person, it's very easy to say this is a bunch of bunkum, and if you are a Hindu, it's very easy to say this is our national treasure. But if you're a Christian, you can say this is these people are going to burn in hell for eternity, and if you're a Jew, you can say this is an impossibility because it's a Jehovah only, and so it's bizarre. But what I know will happen when he's a distraction. There's something called Maya, which is the delusion of the world. And those 15 years that he did not speak to me is because he didn't want his form to get in the way of my evolution. He wanted me to learn about the formless. And we sat there yesterday together and the day before, and what you see is people practicing duality. God's over there and I'm over here. It's so paradoxical because In fact, all of Sai Baba's teachings, it says, you are God, I am God, you are the formless, I'm the formless, I'm nothing more than a reflection of you, yet the second he appears on the scene, it becomes duality.
But about you, your form, let's speak of your form, where will you die?
I will die here, more than
You're
likely.
certain?
Yes, yes.
And when, how will you die? How will you die?
I have no idea. I have no earthly idea.
But the state of mind in which I don't ask whether you are going to die.
Well, I hope.
Stroke.
Well, I hope that I'm evoluting to the very end and learning to the last breath and energetic to the very last moment and in love with love until the very last moment that I die. That is my dream come true. Suddenly, 2.5 years ago, I came here and Sai Baba said, you stay here with me the rest of your life, out of the blue. I'd been coming here for almost 40 years. I have been here hundreds of times, 4, 5, 6 times a year. Whenever I get away, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 days, this, that. I've done work for him, I've done this, I've done that. And suddenly he says, you stay here for the rest of your life with me.
And this is a certitude.
Yes.
Inside of you.
In fact, it was an honor. I'm the only Westerner that sits among his inner sanctums of basically very sophisticated Indians and of high power, spiritually or in other ways. I sit in the primary chair, on which, unless there's a guest who sits in front of me or next to me, you can't see anybody but me from sitting out there where you sit.
Are you afraid of dying?
Having already done it once, I suggest it. I'm afraid of not meeting my destiny. That's the only thing I'm afraid of. I want to meet my destiny. You see, if there is such a thing as karma, which is the first law of physics and metaphysics, for every action there's a reaction. The fascinating thing is there's 2 concentric circles that are occurring during life. One is you are creating more karma, and at the same time you are destroying old karma. So this series of lifetimes, if you believe it, this existence is really a blink in the totality of the thousands of lives that I may have had. And in fact, I've been blessed to be taken back to many, many of these lives by Sai Baba through unique circumstances. So in my mind, and I'm not trying to convince anybody because no one's going to believe me anyway, this is a great honor. And shortly after coming and saying this is my duty to be with my master, it's a great honor. There are very few people, except for people running hospitals and this, that he's asked to stay and be here and be at his feet. I mean, he gets in and out of his automobile 2 feet from me, and he pays a lot of attention to me, and he's very kind. He's given me a lot of instructions.
How does he call you?
Well, it was funny in the early days. In the early days, he used to make fun of me every time I would come, and I'd come up onto the veranda. He'd go, "Oh, look, everybody, it's Tigrett. It's Tigrett is here." And I just, like this. But he calls me Tigrett. He calls me Tigrett. And he's told everyone that this is my tiger, and he's very dangerous, and you leave him alone. And he's protected me from the politics of the organization and everything else. And it's
which might be Byzantine.
Which is as dangerous. It's like a medieval king in his court. They'll kill, lie, cheat, steal, get close to the king. It's human nature at its best. This is a microcosm of the entire world is here, which makes it so even more fascinating.